Excellent. Now let's continue our horsing around and welcome back Collin Moulton. Collin has worked with Robin Williams, Ron White, Dave Chappelle, and the other greats in comedy. He has his own comedy special on Showtime and has been featured on Comedy Central. So let's please give a big hand to Collin.
Right. I am here. Yay. Thank you for having me. I love this.
There you go.
I love it. It's so convenient. Everything about it. Is drinking. I think, you know what I think? I think the Kentucky Derby theme is perfect because it's sort of like an extension of quarantine in a way, because it's a lot of pajama-looking clothing and a lot of alcohol and horses in your yard sometimes, which a lot of us had happen during COVID. My last show that I did with you guys was Dr. Seuss, and that became a PC bear trap like Monday of the week we did it. And so I was forced to like anticipate what's going to happen with what about the Kentucky Derby could possibly be socially unacceptable. And so I racked my brain and I couldn't come up with anything now, but 100 years from now, when we can telepathically communicate with horses and we realize that they're just like us, they just like hay more and don't like pants at all, which is a lot still like some of us, then at that point our great grandkids are going to be like, Grandpa, what? Geez, you used to ride them and you made them eat out of buckets. You probably still don't think that a horse could be an astronaut or a scientist. You're so old. So the point I'm getting at is our history with horses has always been spotty. The first horses to meet man were probably very excited to meet us. They're like, hey, they like us. They're giving us apples and carrots. And hey, what do you do with that rope? And get off my back. Ah! Could you imagine if aliens just came down and started giving us donuts and then riding us around? It would be just inexplicably. Like, I like the donuts and the technology, but the riding is weird. I don't like doing that. So Dick Easom and I did a deep dive, and he gave me the hardiest bits of Kentucky Derby history to share with you today. He covered some of the fluffy stuff, but I'm getting to the nitty gritty today. I don't know if you know this, but previous to 1875, the Kentucky Derby was not in Kentucky. It was the Canadian Derby. And the problem was that initially it was a Canadian Derby, but they were too apologetic and they kept waving each other by and there was no clear winner. So they had to pass it down to the States where people were more competitive. And then and they gave it to New York City. So that's when they called it the New York City Derby. And in New York City, there was a lot of cheating. The horses were taking the subway. We had jockeys getting mugged, and the mounted park police were pulling over the faster horses, and it was a mess. So they had to move it for alliteration reasons to the Dakotas, and it was called the Dakota Derby. And at that point, they did it for 2 years because the first year the ice sheet hadn't lifted by May yet. If you've ever been to. So it was more of a horse luge, which changed the odds-on favorites a lot because the winners that year were not the ones they thought it was. It ended up being the bigger, heavier horses, and the jockeys that were way up around 140 pounds, like Dick said, the real big guys. So it was just by inertia they were winning. So then the next year they put it off until summer because they didn't want it to be frozen. So they found out that that unfortunately coincided with the great beet harvest of the Dakotas. And so then was that the thoroughbreds were pulling plows in the morning and racing at night. It just wasn't a good fit. So then they moved it to Alabama. And as you can imagine, the problems right there, they're obvious. All the jockeys are trying to marry the horses and it wasn't going to work. So then they moved it to Texas, which was a pretty good idea, except you couldn't hear the start gun over the other gunfire that was in the area. So the horses didn't know when to go because they couldn't tell if it was the actual start gun or if it was just somebody celebrating getting a library card. So then they moved it to Oregon, which they thought, we'll care for the horses in Oregon. They're going to communicate with them and figure out what they want. So they sent in an animal communicator and they called this one the Oregon Derby because it was in Oregon. I don't know if you're seeing a pattern here, but they had the animal communicator communicate with the horses, and they found out something that they had never learned, that these horses actually were being triggered by the notion of competition. And so they just decided to make it a brisk, friendly walk, and that just killed them. So everybody got a trophy that year, but it just wasn't as good. So then they did what they should have never done. And this was right before it moved. This is 1873 and a half. They moved it to Florida, and that was disastrous. They lost 3 jockeys before the race to alligators. I mean, they were just snatching them right off the horse. And then there was like shirtless guys with cans of beer trying to wrestle the horses for rent money. It was a mess. And then they had a clear winner, not 31 lengths, Dick Easem, right? It was 120 lengths this winner. So they had to drug test him, and sure enough, he popped hot for meth. So they had to move it to Kentucky, and now we have the Kentucky Derby. So yes, thank you, Dick, and thank you everybody for listening to that history portion. But whenever we talk about horses, I'm going to drag this right into the gutter. We have to talk about bodily functions, because they're just right out there with the horse. They don't care. They're not part of polite society, are they, Peter? You know the deal. So my daughter, she rides hunter jumper, which means she goes to a lot of horse shows, which means I go to a lot of horse shows. So the last one we were at, there was this great winner. She was a great rider. She was on this big, beautiful horse. It was like dark red or roan or some other color that horse people made up to sound smart. And I don't know if you're familiar with any of these colors. So he's a chestnut bay buckskin roan. Like, really, he just looks brownish like the other ones. But okay. So you play along. So anyway, there's all these well-dressed folks that are well-heeled, and they're delighting in the equitation from the backs of their F-250s. And the whole time, this horse is just breaking wind like a 12-year-old boy, just pumping it out. And they're acting like it's not happening. At one point, I was surprised they didn't light them for effect, because it was insane. And it just kept and it was then that I realized that we're missing the boat on this whole horse race thing. Every horse race should be sponsored by Taco Bell. And I think there's a lot of money to be made there. We could put that on the Todd thing, which incidentally, the only reason I got this deployment is because I passed on the pricing and the production thing that was up there just now from Peter. And so you guys got a shot at it. I keep getting all of them, and I wanted to share. So yeah, it was so amazing, this horse's flatulence, that I started misgendering it, because I couldn't imagine it was a girl. And she said, "Dad, that's a mare." And I'm like, "What girl farts like that? It's horrible in public." And then the horse does this. She turns and she aims at the judges, and then poops right at them and wins. Can you imagine a sport that we do? If you could do that in our sports, any other sport, if you went to the Olympics and swam the breaststroke and pooped in the pool, you don't get a medal. No one gets a medal. The Olympics are over. They have to drain the pool and send everyone home. There's no medals. And how dangerous would the NBA be if players were just slipping around in each other's manure? Who would have covered Shaq? No one would have covered Shaq. He'd have been alone the whole time. I think you get my point. I feel like golf and NASCAR wouldn't even be affected, though. You know what I mean? I feel like it already happens in golf and NASCAR. If you've ever seen the post-race interview in NASCAR, where the guy climbs out the window, and sometimes he doesn't. That's the Taco Bell car. See what I'm saying? So before I go, I have to share this. I might go a little long, but I don't. the horse names to me are fascinating, and I'm sure they are to you too. The history of the horse names, I had to figure this out, and Dick and I spent hours. We had 3 sleepless nights in a row trying to sort out where these names came from, and it's that there's rules. There are these rules for non-eligible names based on certain criteria. So there's a few I want to share with you. The names that are suggestive or vulgar or considered to be poor taste are not eligible. So just let's have a moment of silence while we fill in the gaps there and imagine what people are capable of that they had to make a rule. So then names clearly having commercial or artistic and creative significance. So in other words, marketing. So you would have the same situation. You have a NASCAR. It'd be, the race would sound like a commercial. It's Chipotle with a lead and Charmin coming up from the rear. And you just can't have that. So then this is one of my favorites, but not my top favorite. One of my favorite, names of persons no longer living unless approval is granted by the jockey club. So the horse race in this case, if this rule didn't exist, would be like a twisted history lesson because people would want to represent their favorite people from history. And you'd have Genghis Khan pushing past Alexander the Great and Hunter S. Thompson. And on the inside, it's Abe Lincoln and Marie Antoinette, and it's Abe and Marie, and it's Marie Antoinette by a head. Oh, too soon. I realize, of course, for that joke. My favorite of all, though, is names that appear to be designed to harass or otherwise humiliate or disparage a specific individual. So think of the nerve that it would take to take your $500,000 racehorse, or in some cases, multi-million-dollar racehorse, and name it after a neighbor you don't like just to mess with them, or a person from work. It'd be ridiculous. Coming down the stretch, Larry doesn't return tools, and Larry doesn't return tools is now passed by. AJ owes me $20, and Melissa drinks my sodas from the break room fridge. But wait, it's blazing past the ball for the win. It's Jacques missing ass. Whoa! Who saw that coming? Thank you guys very much. It's SMA for the win once again. We love you. I love you.
Collin, it's great to have you back.
Always. That was awesome.